Phil Vischer. Welcome back to the podcast. I am here with Skye Jethani.
Hi, Phil.
How are you, Skye?
I'm all right.
Good.
He seems a little
Not terribly energetic.
odd.
What?
But that's okay.
I don't know.
And Christian Taylor.
Hi, Phil.
Hi, Christian. How are you?
I'm good. Happy to be back.
Yeah, and
I've missed you all.
We always have to comment on what Christian's wearing.
Look
Because look at me. I'm the only one with color.
Yeah, and that's
It's Christmas red.
Chartreuse.
That is not
that
Christmas.
Is not
that maybe was Christmas red about 40 washes ago.
That's probably true.
No offense.
Okay, in my brain, it's Christmas red.
It's
not
dark
all I have.
salmon.
Okay, no, it's not
It's
salmon.
coral.
You are wrong. Both of you. What color is this? Christmas red.
It's red.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And we have a special guest, Pastor Charlie Dates.
Hi, Phil.
Hi, Charlie. How are you?
And hi, Christian, and hi, Skye. Yeah.
So happy to
I
have
assume
you.
in
Thank
your,
you.
in your church, does everyone call you Pastor Charlie? Is that typical?
For the most part.
Okay, yeah, Pastor Charlie. It's Pastor Charlie, who is dark gray. Did you get the memo?
Yeah, well,
He does have a little
I did.
purple.
There's a little
He's got a nice
purple
shirt there.
Is that what color this is?
It looks purple to me.
Purple checks.
All right, yeah.
Did you pick out your clothes this morning? Or
I did,
Does your
yeah.
wife usually do
No,
that?
I do it all by myself.
The question is, does she shop for you?
Sometimes.
Okay, theme song. Hey, it's a podcast. What do you know? Hey, it's a podcast. And we got video. Hey, it's a podcast. So lend an ear. The Phil Vischer podcast starts right here. We'll talk to Skye.
Hi.
And Christian, too.
Hi, Phil.
And we've got a guest. Pastor Charlie Dates is here for you.
Hello, everybody.
Hey, it's a podcast. So lend an ear. The Phil Vischer podcast starts right here. The Phil Vischer podcast starts right here.
Hey, that wasn't so bad.
Thank you. Well, I'm trying to impress Charlie.
Okay.
Can I make a comment for anybody who happens to watch the podcast on
I
the
know what
video?
he's going to say.
What?
We have
He's so worried that he's huge.
Well, no, we've squeezed 4 people into this little table. I'm in the end, and a lot of you don't realize, but this table is actually angled.
Yeah.
So I am much closer to the camera
Yeah.
than Christian or Charlie or
So
Phil.
you're really concerned about
Your size.
looking
Hey,
giant.
I'll be completely honest with you. I have gained a few pounds.
No, you have
I
not.
have, and now I'm looking at myself in the monitor, and I look like I could pick up and eat you people.
And that's not true.
So it's the camera adds 50 pounds.
Skye is not as large as he appears
may
on
appear.
TV. It's like one of those mirror warnings. Objects are closer than they appear. Skye is smaller than he appears.
But I am as bald.
He is.
Pastor Charlie, would you like to make any comments about your size, either real or apparent?
Not at all. I'm just glad to be here and figuring out what's going on while I'm here, and grateful that you guys have
Thank
me.
you. Now, I already mentioned you were actually a recommendation of one of our listeners. I forgot which listener. I didn't write down their name, but you know who you are.
I'm sure they'll remind you.
So thank you. You were on another podcast, the Jude 3 Project.
Absolutely. Lisa Fields down in Jacksonville, Florida.
Oh, is that where she is?
Yeah, that's where it is. Yeah,
Wow.
she's doing great work. Earnestly contending for the faith.
And is she independent? She'd do it
Yeah.
on her own?
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. Has
Listeners, don't assume that you can recommend any guest to us, and we will.
Yeah.
This one just happens
Obey.
to live in the Chicago area and
Yeah.
is willing
Numerous
to drive
people
out.
have wanted us to get Franklin Graham on the phone so we can grill him about his recent statements, and that's just not going to happen. Franklin Graham is not going to just come and be on our podcast.
Certainly not if he listens to our podcast. And then he will definitely stay away.
Sorry.
One thing.
Yes.
I've been gone for 3 weeks. I don't know if you
yeah.
remember that, but I've been gone for 3
Yeah.
weeks. Celebrated my 22nd anniversary.
Oh.
And
Congratulations.
while I was there, I was really thinking about the two of you. And,
Yeah.
you know, I saw some things that reminded me of you. So I figured I would give them to you for Christmas.
Can you remind everybody where you were?
Oh, yes. I was in the Dominican Republic in Punta Cana
Okay.
for the first week. It was amazing. The people down there are just some of the nicest, most lovely people in the world.
Okay.
And then I was in McMinnville, Tennessee, and Fort Campbell, Kentucky, because my son got out of the Army after 4 years of serving. So
Well, he's done?
he's done.
Done?
Yeah,
Now,
came home
now
on Friday.
what's he going to do?
He is going to go to Colorado and join the Colorado National Guard. And then he's going to go to school and get a degrray in technology.
You know, marijuana is legal.
Fortunately, he doesn't
Colorado.
That's why they
consume.
have to guard it.
Yeah, well, he doesn't now.
I know. I am a little worried, but
Okay.
keep him praying.
All
Okay,
right,
so
what'd you bring us?
okay, so
Oh, it's a Santa Claus bag.
yes, it is because
Nice.
I don't know. Santa Claus is a myth, but I still think he's fun.
Well, it's based
Hey, you
in
can't
truth.
say that online. People's kids may be listening.
Oh gosh,
Mad at
sorry.
us.
He's based in
Okay.
truth.
Yes.
St.
So-
Nicholas.
Nicholas.
This one reminded
Oh,
me
no.
of you. Mostly because of the hat.
The hat.
Yes.
Okay, for those of you listening, it is a monkey banging on drums that has been carved out of a coconut.
Yes.
Who's
wearing a fedora
Yes.
Yeah.
that says Our Dominica. Dominicana.
Yeah.
Dominicana.
And
Wow.
for obvious
That's
reasons,
fantastic.
this one reminded me of you.
It's a monkey. Thank you, Pastor Charlie. It's a monkey playing a ukulele like a thing.
And wearing glasses.
And wearing glasses that are wrapped around his ears in loops.
And you know what?
And he
I
has a
think
different
now
hat
you
on.
ought to get one of those, what are they called?
Monkeys?
No, the little caps.
Oh, that's like
beanie.
a driving cap.
Yeah, you need to get one of those because see, obviously it looks good.
Obviously, the driving cap, and here I'll hold it up for the
Coconuts.
folks at home. See?
Yeah, see, it's
the
for my
monkey.
2 bunch of coconuts.
That's
Now,
wonderful. Thank you.
Would you sing "I Have a Lovely Pair of Coconuts"?
And I'm not singing that, but you could.
No, that's okay. If I knew it on the ukulele, that would actually
That would be funny.
kind of fun.
Okay, now to the meat of the story.
Okay, so we wanted to meet somebody. Pastor Charlie is here. You are the pastor of the Progressive Baptist Church?
The historic, I guess one would say.
The historic.
Progressive Baptist Church. It is 96 years old this year, still kicking and going strong.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. So it started in the teens?
1919.
1919.
Yeah.
And it's on the south side of Chicago.
On the just immediately south of downtown. It
Right.
sits right next to the Chicago White Sox Stadium.
Cellular Park?
Yeah.
Cellular Field. What
US
is it?
Cellular
Park or
Field.
Field?
Cellular
Field.
Field, right.
It's a field.
I bet that's
It's
fun
not a
on
park.
game days on Sunday.
I've not been there since it was
How did that
Comiskey.
go?
Well, we went to 2 services in part because of game days. The parking is incredibly limited, so they don't play though till 1 o'clock. We're wrapping up our
But
second
people
service.
get
by
down
then.
there at like 10, 9
Well,
or
the
10.
Sox are in pretty bad shape.
Can you sell them anything to the crowd? You know, could the church like sell soft drinks in the parking lot and turn it into a money making opportunity?
So the church is a non-for-profit,
Yeah.
and so we are not selling pretty much anything, but
Yeah.
we could use it as a creative way to communicate the gospel. However, on Sundays, our property is used just for our needs, but through the
Yeah.
week,
Yeah.
we could do any number of things.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks for helping us make money, though.
Yeah. Well, we're looking out for you. In 2011, at age 30, Pastor Charlie became the youngest senior pastor in Progressive's 90-year history. Pastor Charlie has also served as an adjunct professor at the Moody Bible Institute and serves on the Community Advisory Board for the Chicago Fire Department.
Ooh,
It's
that's
terrible.
interesting.
It's terrible.
Why is it terrible?
Yeah. Well, the Chicago Fire Department has challenges with recruiting, training, and maintaining African Americans. But so does the police department, which is part of the reason why we've got a lot of drama going on there. And the further you get into it and you try to investigate how things work, the more depressing it can become, quite frankly.
How long have you been in that role in the community?
2 years.
2 years. So in 2 years, would you say there's been progress, or is
Very
it,
little.
what's
very
the
little.
biggest? Well, it's an unfair question. What's the barrier that comes to mind?
It's historic, I think. It is the problem that many of the departments face are issues that should have been resolved 30 years ago. The department was sued, I think, in the 80s or so because African Americans, although they took the exam, their exams were being tossed at one point. And so I really feel like we're kind of facing the Amalekites. You know, it's David fighting enemies that Saul should have destroyed. And, so back 40, 50 years ago, had people just been treated equitably, we would be okay. But now it's a bit harder in recruiting and getting people through the exams and then getting them stationed at a place where they can endure the grind of acclimating to the fire department culture. It's not what you see on television. So getting to a firehouse where you can grow and then connecting with officers who are above you who will look out for your promotion and not just kind of keep you stalled.
So it's kind of a fraternity, and it's hard to break in and be a pioneer when there's a long-standing culture of exclusion.
Yeah, it is. It is. I think that's a good way to say it.
And the police department would be
Worse.
Worse.
It's got to be worse.
Okay. You were an extra on Chicago Fire, weren't you?
I was. And I was also a producer for an EPK for Chicago Fire.
Yeah. So is there more diversity on
There's
Chicago
one
Fire,
person
the
of color.
show?
Actually, there's two people of color the last time I was watching.
Okay.
But it was pretty white bread, sadly.
Okay. So it was.
And
but it
you're
was,
right. It's not real. It's not real life.
It's television.
Yeah.
Well, Charlotte,
I'm just wondering if they have successfully made the Chicago Fire Department
Look
more
better than it
diverse on TV than it is in real life.
well, that was my question. Is do you have any stats on what percentages of minorities are in the police department or the fire department?
Not offhand, and had I thought about it, I would have brought it with me. But it's something like, with the police department, I think something like 11 African Americans graduated out of a recent class of hundreds. And so we all know, though, that the Chicago Police Department is primarily white Irish, and it has been that. And so it's not just a fraternity; it's almost paternalistic. People raise their
family.
kids to become part of that experience, and so sometimes
and the New
not
York
well.
Police Department is similar, right? It's just the stereotype of the Irish cop that goes back forever.
It could be. I must confess my ignorance about
Can
New
you get
York.
back to me on that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, let me ask you, does that mean that young African American boys and girls do not even want to work in that environment? I mean, I cannot even fathom taking on that challenge of wanting to be in that culture.
I don't think that at all. I don't think they are aware of the culture per se. I think actually if you talk to a number of, and we have a number of policemen in our congregation, and we've got a couple firemen who are part of the Chicago department, and their challenges have more to do with the internal racial strife and struggle that is not made public to the younger generation. So I don't think there's any hint of that kind of trickling down, so to speak, to new applicants. I think it's hard to, if you don't see yourself, it's kind of like going to a Christian divinity school and you don't see many or if any African American professors, but you're an African American student. It can start to make you feel like you don't belong in that, psychologically, that you don't belong in that industry, if you will. And so we've got to work hard at recapturing the idea of public service with our young people, period, and that you can make a decent living serving the public. And I think that's the challenge. There's so many ways to make money.
That doesn't jump to
give your life.
young people's minds.
Yeah. Okay, so you grew up in Chicago?
Born and raised, far south side, Morgan Park community. So that's almost as far south as you can go.
Okay. And when did you know you wanted to be in ministry?
4 or 5, yeah.
Wow.
Seriously?
Yeah, seriously, yeah. So I grew up at the Mount Calvary Baptist Church on 111th and Troop on the far south side of Chicago. And church really was a lot. It was an extended family for us. And I came to believe the gospel story early on in life. And like many of your listeners or people who've been exposed to your product, you can only imagine the power of captivating a child's imagination with the true story of the gospel. That happened to me. And I just...
Were you a child preacher?
No.
They never let you preach?
They never let me. I would have been, but they didn't let me. But what happened was I was always enamored with the preaching moment. It just, whereas others would drift, I would sit on the edge of my seat, and I was taken by it. And then I've got some oratorical ability.
Was this a predominantly African American church?
Yeah.
See, if you'd gone to a white church, you would not have been on the edge of your seat.
I didn't say that.
That's okay. We can say that.
That's right.
I'll tell you, I'm from Mississippi, and some of my favorite times.
Really,
were
we from Mississippi too.
Really?
My father is. Yep.
Where?
We probably, our people probably didn't hang out in Mississippi.
They probably did.
Yeah.
But where?
But Natchez.
Okay, so I'm from South Mississippi, so I'm sure that's the only reason we didn't hang out.
No,
I was
Natchez is
from
down
Laurel.
at the bottom.
Well, I'm in.
Oh, you're like in the water bottom.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but anyway, down there, my most intense and wonderful worship experiences were in African American churches, and no question, much better than in my little.
How often did you guys go to African American churches?
Well,
Was that just
It's complicated, but I
just
always
you.
had really close friends, and it started in my schools were not desegregated until I was in 7th grade. I don't know about where you came from, but in 7th grade they started busing in my hometown, and so for whatever reason there were girls in my school, 2 white girls that beat me up during the day. I joined the basketball team, was the only white girl on the team. And I was enveloped into this awesome family.
It is amazing.
And they protected me.
It is
through junior
amazing.
high.
Now, I want to be clear. My folks are from Mississippi.
Oh, okay.
I am born and raised in Chicago. Yeah. They would not, my mother was pretty committed to our never returning to the South.
Yeah, it's pretty horrible.
Yeah.
Still today.
It's pretty bad. But
Okay, so you went to college, University of Illinois. You went to Trinity Divinity School, and then instead of driving out to the suburbs and getting a nice, cushy job at a church, that wanted to be diverse, you went back to the city.
yeah, man, I don't think anybody was going to take me from the suburbs for some obvious reasons. But then I think that given my personality and my convictions, I'm probably a bit too edgy in the pulpit. I do, by the grace of God, get quite a number of invitations and opportunities in non-black churches. And I preached at Park earlier this year, among some others, and have
You don't
been at
seem
Moody.
very edgy.
I've never
Yeah.
been back. Well,
I haven't heard you preach yet. Is that it?
Yeah, when the unction comes.
we'll see. We'll see. But I think there's some hard issues. One, here's the other thing. All right. So I wasn't only raised in an African-American community. I very much identify with black culture. And there are a lot of churches that appeal or look for diversity. They want somebody who's black in color, but they don't necessarily identify with black culture. No, I don't mean any harm by this. This might lose me a lot of friends, and here's the edginess coming out. I married a black woman. I still live in the hood. Our church was an old, declining black church. And with the opportunities to go elsewhere, I just, like Paul felt called to the Gentiles, man, I feel called to black people. And I love black people,
I do too.
I can tell.
I do too. They're my people.
And so,
I grew up in Iowa.
Yeah.
not
You
far.
love corn, huh?
We didn't have
Do they have black
any.
people there? Yeah.
They might have a couple now, but no. Although we had a large Latino population because of the agriculture.
Oh.
But it was a largely migrant Latino
Yeah.
population, and we just.
And I want. Let me say this, in case any of your listeners might take it the wrong way. I'm not saying somebody who does not do it the way that I have done it is
It's
less
wrong.
than. Yeah, I'm just saying that would not have worked in a white suburban church. I don't think.
But there's a long history. I remember back in the 90s when I was a college student and in seminary at Trinity, there was all these books coming out, all this rhetoric around racial reconciliation. I think a lot of it was given a platform because of the Promise Keepers movement was really pushing that. And so many ministries, churches and parachurch ministries were all about racial reconciliation. And you go back and look at what happened after that, it was exactly what you said. A lot of it was, well, let's hire more diversely and get some token folks of color from different backgrounds so we can say that we are
Absolutely.
committed. But it never got deeper than that. It didn't go into systemic change. It didn't empower those folks with actual authority in changing the way things happen, and it fizzled out.
Yeah.
And that's, we want to make ourselves feel better by doing symbolic things, but we don't want to deal with the underlying deeper root
Absolutely.
stuff. And that
I think
very
more of us are, too many of us, I should say, are more American than we are Christian. The actual breakdown of what you just described is really a replica of American culture. It is, that culture has creeped in and dominated the gospel culture that should
We say
take
that
over.
almost every week
Oh,
on this
straight up. That's
podcast.
what's up.
That's what we say.
you
every
are a
week.
natural fit for our
Yeah,
podcast,
you are.
Charlie.
Yeah, there you go.
Standing up for the church.
And he's never
or for
listened to our podcast.
America.
Don't tell anybody.
okay.
So Sunday morning is the most, this has been a common saying, is the most racially segregated time of the week. But yet sometimes when people say, oh, here's a white church, here's a black church, let's put them together.
Right.
It turns into everyone acting like the white church. Or it's not even enjoyable because people lose, you lose your tradition.
Yeah.
You lose your heritage.
Yeah.
How can we be diverse as a church without
Yeah.
losing what is unique about, the African experience
Right.
of church
Yeah.
versus, say, the Lutheran experience, which is very different.
Well, there are some churches that are doing it well. I think we should acknowledge that. I think Brian Laritz has worked really hard at not only leading in this way, but writing
Where is he?
in a way. He's in New York now. He's at the Trinity
He's
Grace.
at Trinity Grace. I actually ran into him back in August when I was out
Okay.
there.
Yeah.
Well, why haven't we had him on the show?
Well, because we're not in New York.
Yeah. Well, he's in Chicago quite a bit. I think.
Do you have a diverse congregation?
Not
or-
really.
No.
Yeah.
Do
We
you
have.
want one?
Does
it matter?
Yeah, it matters.
Well, for what you're trying to accomplish.
Right. So let me answer this first question before we get to that one, and that is, I think, how in the world does that happen? One is it kind of already happens in some sense through the work week. I mean, the other 6 days, a lot of the young adults at our church do life with non-black young adults. But on Sunday, the weekends, everybody kind of migrates to their own neck of the woods. And I think Philippians 2 really is the model, and that is somebody has to give up privilege. Somebody has to exercise incredible humility for the benefit and the ascension of the other. And what we have found is, and I don't mean this, is a whitewashing of evangelicalism in America, theologically, culturally.
We agree with you.
But politically, it tends to bend toward the favor of the majority, and that also affects the way churches are led. And so you got a lot of passive pastors who, I understand it for job protection and security, will not be aggressive in their local church and will not build relationships themselves. Then you have some that are and a number of them in Chicago with whom I'm developing relationship. And from that, I think there is a natural kind of appreciation and affection for people who are not like you. Other than that, all the programmatic things will work for a time, but then you got to move back to Glen Ellen, Carroll Stream, where you got to move back there, and then I'm going to go back to Brownsville. We don't live together, so we really don't have a vested interest in the communities because we don't live in the same communities, and then we're going to go to church more likely than not where we live, and that's going to, unless that part is broken, it's going to cement the divide.
Right. But considering the role that the black church has played historically as a community center, how do you think that's more important than? Well, everyone should be mixed up as much as possible.
Well, let me say it a different way. Rather than a community center, let's say the center of the community. Because the emphasis historically of the African-American church has been properly theological. I hope to, and I'll say this on your podcast, it's already mine. My dissertation is kind of in process, and I'm tagging it in defense of orthopraxy because
I have no idea what you just said. What the heck does that mean?
So let me tell you. So
Speak to my level.
She's from the South. I'm sorry. Oh,
that's one of the
That's
things.
going to get him in trouble.
Not supposed to say.
Our evangelical culture, the gospel-believing people, have tended to be more propositional in our defense of doctrine, and so
I know I'm still lost. What's that mean?
We are big for right speech about God, saying what the Trinity is, being clear that salvation is by grace through faith alone in Jesus Christ.
So we have the catchphrases supposedly with the right doctrine.
I think right doctrine. We've got the right doctrine, and we defend that to the T. I mean, we'll call somebody a heretic in a moment if they come another way. What we do not have is the in my opinion, in a pronounced way in the area of how we do life, is orthopraxy, which is right practice. So you've got right belief,
right believing,
and
right
then you've got right.
That means your
practice.
outside matches your inside.
That
means you walk the walk and talk the talk.
That means what you do lines up with what you say you believe.
Is it that we don't have orthopraxis, or we just have a severely truncated orthopraxis? Because it seems like historically, even politically, a lot of white evangelicalism gets really bent out of shape about certain issues,
Right.
but completely blind to many, many others.
Right, and I would tend to, and this might be unfair, I want to watch my words, but I would tend to think of it as wrong. More than truncated, because again, it benefits that group. It doesn't, but the crux of our faith is a sense of selflessness. It is Jesus Christ who in this season became flesh, gave up all of his privilege for the benefit of those who have not. Once we believe that, we are called to live that. Now, that will make some listeners really upset. But I think what the African-American community has done is, in addition to holding on to right biblical doctrine, it has been forced to be the voice of conscience to power. It has had to speak truth to those in authority, and it has had to hold accountable systems that either break down black families or benefit black families. And in that regard, it has been the center of the community. I'm not sure that it's been maintaining that here in the last 15 years, and as much force as it did before.
Yeah, you mentioned this in the in the podcast that I think we all listened to. You were Black Friday. Where were you on Black Friday? I hear you were shopping on Michigan Avenue.
Well, you know, I did what some might think is wrong. I mean, I marched on Black Friday, and in response and outrage to the murder of Laquan McDonald, who's a complicated individual, and the cases.
It's one of the most clear.
Sounds pretty simple to me.
Of the shootings, it's one of the more clear cut when someone was shot 16 times.
Right.
Who did not have a gun.
Right.
Had a 3-inch knife.
Yeah, I'm not talking about his murder being complicated. I'm saying his life is a complicated story.
Okay.
Yeah, and so he's a ward of the state. He's in and out of custody. With he was born to a teenage mother. He's raised by his grandmother. His grandmother passes. He had struggled with post-traumatic stress disorder in the most profound ways and was never treated. He took drugs to kind of, marijuana in particular, to calm himself, even though he didn't know he had PTSD. And the courts knew it. And he was actually turning around. That night that he was murdered, he got into a squabble at home, and he went out, did some stuff he should not have done. He wasn't really armed, a 3-inch knife. And because the audio came up missing on the dash cam that particular night, and 80 minutes of video came up missing from the local Burger King. We really don't know all of what transpired. But we do know this, that Officer Van Dyke took advantage of someone who was the least, so to speak, in our culture, who was the left out, who was broken, and who was bruised. And so there is a lot to Laquan McDonald's story that is appealing and that is common. And knowing that this officer took 16 shots, emptied his clip, and his partner had to tell him not to reload. The kid is already dead, and he's going to keep shooting. Something's wrong with that, and that people like that can ascend to power and wear a badge. It is a problem. And
but then it was 13 months before.
So that's exactly where I was going. Absolutely.
As tragic and horrible and clearly criminal as that was, what adds a whole nother layer of stink to this thing is the fact that we didn't see the video. There was no prosecution for 13 months, and we happened to be in the midst of a very contested mayoral election.
Sure, and it's 2 months after Ferguson.
Right.
And the council, whatever council City Hall got or gave, was wrong. In retrospect, I think the mayor would agree with me in saying it was wrong. I think that there are, of course, if you heard his speech, there are a lot of legal ramifications about why he couldn't get things out. And so, man, I'd have let that thing out and said, I'm mad with the people. I'm going to march with everybody else.
Well, and didn't Laquan McDonald's family get paid?
They did.
Was it $5 million?
$5 million, yeah.
Well, so how did this reporter, it's my understanding that a reporter got wind of the story somehow. Do you know how that happened?
I do not, but I got a guess.
Okay.
I got a hunch that one of the cops who saw that tipped them off.
That's interesting.
Yeah. I think there's a code of silence in the Chicago Police Department that basically, you got to, I forget the movie with, I don't want to name it, but anyway, there's a sense in which if you betray your partners, they might not be there for you when you need them. So I think somebody who was in on what happened tipped this reporter off, and they pursued it and would not back off, and thank God they would not. And to the $5 million that was paid, I think the way City Hall works is that they were likely briefed on a number of cases where there was a lump sum of money described, and they might not have known all the details about this particular case and how much money from that lump sum went there. They have to settle these kind of lawsuits all the time, or issues, and so they do it kind of like Congress does with a bunch of bills. You pass one, and everything in that kind of goes through.
So give me little bit more detail, though. Laquan McDonald's family obviously finds out about his, they assume just death at that point, not murder, but death. And did they sue the police department for wrongful?
Well, I'm not exactly sure the sequence of how it went, but he's got some pretty engaged people in his family, extended family.
Okay.
And so, yes, they end up pursuing the city.
I would just think that the city paying $5 million, on some level, that's an admission of guilt.
Oh,
that
absolutely.
something was wrong. I mean, if
absolutely.
they said, hey, if this was like a Ferguson situation where the city and the police officers say, no, we were attacked and this was justifiable, blah, 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 they wouldn't have paid out $5 million.
Well, the report that was filed said that Laquan McDonald was lunging at the officer. Now, we've seen the
video clearly
and we
doesn't
know
show
that isn't the case.
He's walking away.
Absolutely. And so I think at the end of the day, the powers that be may have been afraid that Ferguson was coming to Chicago and did what it could
Make it go away.
to cover up. Now, the city has a history, obviously, of covering things up. And the state's attorney, for that matter, has a history of neglecting issues of civil rights as it relates to people of color, in my opinion. And we've got some good congressmen who can point that out. And so she's got to go too. But I think that...
This is Anita Alvarez.
Yes.
Yeah.
So to your statement of, where was I on Black Friday? I'm out at Black Friday saying, one, this is a tragedy, and somebody needs to be held accountable for it. And I think we saw that. Of course, our church marched again on Monday with a number of other churches, about 20 other churches, to the police headquarters. The next day, the police superintendent was released. That's one thing, but
fired. Not let out of jail.
His resignation was requested. and
they're hoping that's the scapegoat that will calm everyone down.
But it won't.
Yeah, there's more.
But it won't.
Somebody needs to get strung up, and that was what they could do quickly. But people want the mayor now.
And the mayor didn't want to do it. I mean,
Yeah.
But go ahead.
The whole
Well,
thing
no,
stinks.
my question was, I'm assuming that, the people marching are hoping that if we, can amass enough people to say this has to stop, they will respond. And so maybe the beginning of that is this superintendent being let go. But are you thinking that we continue to do this to show them that that's not enough?
Well, I think there are multiple levels or angles from which you come at reform. One is demonstration. Another is legislation. Some of it is activism, mobilizing, organizing. So the demonstration was on the Mag Mile for the sake of hitting the financial pockets of Chicago, which would then put pressure on the mayor's office and beyond the mayor's office to attend to the problem. And I can tell you it happened. Nobody wanted to be out there. And then, there were some people who were blocking the doors, so you couldn't get, unless you could get through the human chain, you could not do that. And that on the day when a number of those stores actually make it into the black for the year, ends up making Chicago an undesirable place in the long run to operate a business if these issues are not heard. It was Martin King who said that violence is the language of the unheard, that protest in a better way, I think he said protest is the language of the unheard. That is, when you do not feel like the powers that are in office are hearing you, you need to speak against them. And so that's what I think.
There seems to be a lot of that.
Yeah.
Well, and
these days.
I've mentioned this repeatedly on the podcast about the economics of all this, but King also was very adamant in the bus boycott in Montgomery. Yeah. He said openly that it isn't just going to be an appeal to conscience that makes them change these policies. It's going to be the pocketbook.
Absolutely.
When you start having an economic consequence for the prejudice that's going on.
Absolutely.
And that's what you guys demonstrated on Black Friday, that the city's not going to pay attention. If you were to stay on the South Side and have protests and marches, they're not going to care.
Right, yeah.
You bring it to the Magnificent Mile on Black Friday and prevent people from making money, and then you see change happen.
Now, you've noticed something. You talked about this on the podcast. You've noticed something that's concerning in between the generations of protesting, that especially where you had the older pastors marching out in front, but then you had the younger kids that didn't seem to grow up in the church or have the respect for the role of the church
Right.
in protest.
Yeah.
And you talk a little bit about that?
Can I ask a precursor to that?
Yeah.
I was going to ask that as well, but the precursor for that is it sounded like you feel like the church has the responsibility to sort of lead this front. And my question to you is, why do you feel that way? And then how do you feel like things have changed in terms of the elders and the younger in the church?
Absolutely. So I pitched this article to Christianity Today. Maybe they'll take it after this podcast.
Maybe.
We'll see.
If they won't, I will.
Skye can twist their
Yeah,
I have no
yeah,
clout
yeah.
there, but I want to read it because I might put it on my website.
Well, listen, I think that a basic study of the semantic domain of the word righteousness, right? So just doing word study in the original language, you notice that the idea of justice and righteousness are,
it's the same word.
yeah. They share the same cognate. So fundamentally, from the word of God, those who are righteous are just and must seek justice. And I think it's more than just a good idea. It's the only way to get justice, is that righteousness has to be the foundation. You cannot, for instance, some of the decisions that the Supreme Court has made and other courts have made, you cannot have justice where there is not first righteousness. Righteousness does a whole lot that enables justice to take place. And so those of us who have an allegiance to righteousness, who are born again, who've been filled with the Spirit of God, have a responsibility, and I would say to your point, a first responsibility to speak out against these issues. And some may not feel comfortable in marching or demonstrating, I get that, but at least in your church, in your communities, at your home, these conversations need to take place. And I don't think we need to wait for, big issues like this one. There are other more systemic issues of injustice that the people of righteousness need to care about. There's a world in which Laquan McDonald was able to be and to come about in the way that he was. And not just a sin-sick, sin-cursed world, but a sin-sick, sin-cursed government. And a notion of even the church's disaffection for how economics affect certain neighborhoods, and education and opportunity. And that's how you develop a kid like this. And so, yes, I fundamentally believe that the church has to, and if we do not, we're seeing it right now, to your question. We leave the conversation of justice to people who have no allegiance to righteousness. And so the outcome of the conversation will never be enough.
So they want justice for the pure sake of justice, not undergirded with righteousness.
I think their definition of justice does not go far enough. It does not equate what Christian justice is. I think some of them want retribution.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What we're saying is we want all people to be treated fairly, appropriately, for others to be considered as more important than ourselves. Mm-hmm. It is a change of mind, a transforming, a renewing of the mind that only the message of the gospel can exhibit, illustrate, and then ultimately enforce. But how do you tell right from wrong apart from the gospel? I mean, that's a more basic question, right? Mm-hmm. So who gets to say that what happened was wrong? Well, fundamentally, it's God. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. He gets to say that was wrong, and we're his representatives.
Os Guinness has used the language of virtue. There needs to be that internal righteousness of virtue that creates a free society, but then it needs to be expressed externally in justice and just systems and form. But it seems like we have this, and we talked about this with a previous guest, there's a split even among evangelicals where some traditions emphasize heavily on the external social justice component, and then the other side emphasizes the internal virtue component of character, and then we make it an either-or decision. Yeah. It's either personal responsibility or social responsibility, and it's not either-or.
Well, what do you say to, because, we would have conservatives in our audience who would say, well, the problem with the inner city is they're not being responsible.
Yeah, absolutely.
They just need to be responsible for themselves. But then we also have more liberal voices in our audience that will say, well, the problem with the inner city is we need more programs. Mm-hmm. We need more money put into more programs, and then the government can turn things around. Yeah. What do you say to both of those?
Well, I think there's some indisputable facts. Michelle Alexander wrote this profound book that I would encourage your listeners to read called The New Jim Crow. Mm-hmm. So you know what Jim Crow is.
Mm-hmm. I do.
So it's this system of segregation that is legal or was legal that effectively created a second-class citizenry. it has been dismantled. There are no longer fountains for black people and fountains for white people, or an entrance for white people and entrance for black people. She argues that the disproportionate mass incarceration of African American men has created a new second-class citizenry. And so there is this new Jim Crow. There are, and actually, and this is documented, I mean, from Reagan to Bill Clinton probably being the worst in this sense, with his 3 strikes and you're out, created these drug laws that have sent more African American men to jail than anybody else. And the question your conservative listeners and non-conservative listeners need to ask is, are black people doing more drugs than anybody else? I doubt it. Man, we don't fly no planes. We ain't going down to South America to get none of that stuff. And we know this, it's happening in the suburbs everywhere. Yet we are disproportionately.
The heroin out here is terrible.
But we are. African Americans are in the city disproportionately are locked up.
Have you read
a great number?
Brian Stevenson's book, Just Mercy, his new book?
I have not.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, help me, man.
He's. I interviewed him a couple years ago at an event and was he's an attorney that represents usually death row inmates who didn't get fair trials, things like that. But he has this book called Just Mercy, where he unpacks a lot of the stuff you're talking about and gives very specific stories and examples of people who've been...
and I think that's what your listeners need.
It's a beautiful book.
You need very specific stories to see how this is played out. And so, to that point, there are systemic injustices that doesn't just make... If people are more responsible, then they get to come out and come up.
Right.
You know, my mother's one of the most responsible people I know. We were raised in a very responsible manner, and she insisted that we... become educated. And she sacrificed to send us to the schools that she did with the purpose of us being able to learn and grow and be exposed and all of that. And undoubtedly that has helped me. And so now I am doing better in a real sense than she did, and our children will do better in another sense. But that doesn't happen without help. It, quite frankly, it doesn't. And you can point at all of the people who made it and say, oh, you know, could you just be more like this? That's not the case. I've got some contemporaries and some very wonderful non-black churches around Chicago, my age, a little younger, who own businesses, who got help from parents right out of school or grandparents, and didn't come
Trump
out.
Got a little loan for $1 million from his dad so he could start real estate.
Probably, and the particular family I'm thinking of didn't come out with student loans. Immediately was able to move into a place and own a car. All the basic things that people take for granted in helping you to be self-sufficient are not afforded necessarily to a number of the citizens in the inner city. Not to imagine some of the other issues of home life and food,
but you
deserts.
know, here I sit here going, what truthfully is the most helpful thing? What is really going to change that around? I think one key has to be education. You know, for sure, but that's not the only answer.
It's not the only answer. It's a multifaceted problem, and there is no quick fix. I will say this: the schools in the suburb are absolutely better than the schools in the city. There's a reason for that. In Illinois, the school funding formula is based upon property tax income, and so you can guarantee that your kid would get a different quality of education based upon where you live. And it's not just the home that you purchase, but it's the taxes you pay around where you purchase your home. And so you can effectively, economically segregate yourself and guarantee yourself a different set of opportunities if you can afford the property taxes or if the property is passed down to you. And so there are some people who, for instance, and let me go here real fast. The issue of housing in the city has been a long-term issue. This is why Dr. King comes to Chicago in 1966 to protest the issue of housing. You've got more African Americans living in the housing projects in Chicago than you do Selma, Alabama in 1966, which is why, actually, let me go a step further. You're from Mississippi. There are more black people living in Cook County in 66 than there are in the entire state of Mississippi.
Wow.
Exactly. And housing is an issue because they do not have jobs. They came in search of opportunity, but do not have jobs en masse. And those who do, who are earning an equitable dime, gainful employment, in comparison to their own peers, cannot buy property outside of certain neighborhoods.
Right.
Because the banks have redlined. And as a matter of fact, the federal government had a program called the Neighborhood Composition Rule, where they gave concessionary loans, this is documented, to contractors to build property so long as they promised in the deed not to sell to African Americans. And so you end up having black enclaves, almost a black Chicago, because people who could buy and move out could not. And so play the real estate game. If your great-grandfather owned property and passed it down to your grandparents, that gave them a leg up. It also probably gave them some equity. And that trickles down through generations, which enables you to live in a way differently than others. And so we're seeing now, as it relates to some of the issues, education opportunity, we're inheriting the bad decisions of previous generations who sought just to kind of keep people separate. That doesn't work.
So, Pastor Charlie, because we have to wrap it up pretty soon, as a white guy in the suburbs, what the heck can I do?
I think you could do more podcasts like this. Yeah, no, I'm serious, man.
Okay.
I think, Billy Graham went around tearing down the segregation, the tension rods, whatever, at his crusades when he was challenged on this issue. You might not be able to move to where I live, and I'm not asking you to. You might not be able to come to our church. That would be nice, but I'm not asking you to.
I want to come visit it now.
Yeah,
I want to hear that edgy preaching.
My mom teaches at Wheaton College. She teaches children's ministry, and every semester she brings all of her students down to St. Sabina.
Oh, yeah.
And they're required to go to at least one, 3-hour service at St. Sabina, which always has a huge impact on them.
Yeah.
There's another issue to this, though, when you ask what can we do, that this has bothered me for a while. A couple years ago, I can't be too specific, but it'd get me in trouble. A couple years ago, I was traveling regularly to a city in the Southwest to do some research and reporting on how churches there were responding to undocumented immigrants and just it was obviously a very pressing issue in the Southwest. So I interviewed quite a few pastors, large churches and small churches, mostly Anglo pastors. Every single one of them agreed that the immigration system was broken, agreed that the state that they were in was not dealing with the problem well, that there were tons of families and individuals, believers and non-believers, who were just being chewed up and spit out by the system, children especially who were being treated unfairly because of this. They made the case to me that this is a gospel issue, this is a biblical issue, we need to be doing something about this, God cares about the sojourners and the strangers, all great rhetoric. And then I would turn around and ask them, okay, so what are you saying in your church about this? Or what are you saying in the pulpit about this? And the vast majority of them said, I can't talk about this.
Absolutely.
I can't talk about it from the pulpit.
Yeah.
I'm like, you just, you're giving me all the right answers biblically and theologically and culturally and justice. Why aren't you talking about it in your church? Well, most of the people in my church listen to conservative talk radio, and if I start talking about this, they're going to run me out.
Yeah, that's true.
And the second thing I would hear is, well, ultimately what we're concerned about is saving souls, and we want to preach the gospel, and this is going to become a barrier because it sounds too political. And so they kind of push it off to a tangential issue. It's not, and as I've bumped into this in different ways in different places around different issues, you realize an awful lot of us who are in the pulpit are just scared.
Don't have the courage.
They don't have the courage to preach prophetically because I'm going to lose my job, or people are going to be uncomfortable, or I might alienate someone. And I get you need to be wise and shrewd about when you address different things.
Because we've turned our churches into cruise ships.
Yes, we have.
That's his
Apparently.
new
Instead of battleships.
And we want people to be comfortable and have a good time, or they'll go somewhere else.
Well, but in a lot, especially in the white church, we have so driven the prophetic voice of the scriptures out of the pulpit because people won't tolerate it. They don't want to be uncomfortable or challenged. And
self-help sells better.
Honestly, until more majority culture churches and church leaders are willing to take that risk, we are not going to see a unity between I don't care if it's African American, Latino American, Anglo American. We're not going to see unity in the church around these issues until the white church leaders step up and say, we are willing to speak out on this stuff.
So Skye is spot on. That's exactly where I was going in the sense. There needs to be conversation. This is what you can do. There needs to be conversation and an open-heartedness around the dinner table, in your growth groups, small groups, whatever they are, and talk to your pastors about your need to hear a gospel perspective on these issues. And there have been examples, and there are examples of when churches go wrong by engaging issues of culture. They end up identifying with one political party over the next, and then next thing you know, to be Christian is to be Republican, which is not the brand that Jesus was either. Yeah, that's not true. And neither to be Democrat per se either. But
well, of course, because Democrats can't be Christian.
Jesus was a libertarian, as we all know.
We lack often the courage to have these necessary conversations. But I think if the pew would develop a palate, and your listening audience can do this, then the pulpit could probably go at it a bit further. Now, this is where I don't care. I'll go for it anyway. End of the day, it is what it is. But I think you're right. I think there is this implicit, and this is what I'm saying in defense of orthopraxy. There's this implicit, all we care about is right doctrine, people getting saved. If you know this, then you're going to heaven, and that's fine. But what about the issues that trap a man's soul on earth? For instance, Jesus says, in quoting the prophet Isaiah, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. He hath anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor, to bring good news, to bind up the brokenhearted, to restore sight, to restore the ability to the lame." If we say those things are spiritual, then we have effectively allegorized the text. Jesus inaugurates his ministry by bringing the kingdom in physical ways to the least, the lost, the burdened, and the left out. We got to do the same.
Amen to that.
I'll summarize that as a song. Will you come back sometime?
Sure, happy to.
And we're serious. We'd like to have you back.
Well, he may not drive a Harley, but he still is cool. His name is Pastor Charlie, and he's no fool, and he's trying to spread the golden rule to kids in his neighborhood, in and out of school, and we can help if we talk about it, if we don't ignore or listen to the squawking of the radio about it, if we meet people that aren't like us and realize there are brothers and sisters on the same bus of life, we can make a big difference and stop over-spiritualizing things that weren't meant to be allegorical. Okay.
That was good.
Don't encourage it.
Thanks for coming, Pastor Charlie.
Thank you for having me.
Love to have you again sometime, and we will see you all next week.
Bye. Everybody.